coming over for another lesson here. Marty, thank you for having me. I would like to talk today about how do you buy the right strings for you? How do you decide what are the right strings when you're trying to figure out, okay, there are all these numbers, I don't know what they mean, there are all these different kinds, these different metals. How do you find the right ones? Well, we'll talk about the differences today and how you go about finding the right set of strings for you. So I'm holding an acoustic guitar. I'd like to talk about the differences in all the kind of acoustic guitar strings that are out there. The first biggest thing is you may have seen coated versus uncoated. So uncoated strings are usually a little bit cheaper. They can ring a little bit more, they can be a little bit brighter sometimes, but the cool thing about coated strings is it protects the string itself from the oils and the dirt in your hands, and so they can tend to last longer. So if coated strings are a little bit more expensive, they actually will last longer. So in the end, it could actually end up saving you some money, and they sound a lot warmer. They're also, coated strings are easier to play. So when I first started playing, I bought coated strings for a long time. I actually still buy coated strings on my acoustic guitars because I just like the way they sound. I find they're a little bit warmer. They're definitely easier on the touch and they last much longer. Now you can see these terms like round wound strings versus half round strings versus flat round strings. Those are all tongue twisters. Say that 10 times fast. But round wound strings are the most common kind that you're gonna find out there. They have like this comfortable ribbed texture almost to them, and they have a really bright sound. If you see some half round strings, they generally feel a little bit smoother and they generally have a little bit of a warmer tone. And then if you're all the way on the other end of the spectrum, flat wound strings definitely have like the ultra smooth surface. They're really good for like sort of a vintage sound. You know, they're popular in like mellow, jazzy music. Often you can, with bass players, flat wound strings are really popular because it has that like smooth surface and you can get that like really mellow jazz sound. So those are what all of those words mean. Now, in terms of string gauge, you're gonna see all of these numbers. Generally, I like to describe strings by the gauge of your high E string. So you'll see, like, you'll hear 10s or 11s or 12s, and you're like, what are all these numbers? On the front of a package of strings, you'll see like 10 to 52s. And that basically just means that your high E string is a 10 and your low E string is a 52. In terms of like the measurement of the diameter of the string, that's what it's really talking to. Generally for acoustics, I love 12s as a gauge. That's just a personal preference. Please feel free to explore. 12s are just, they give like a pretty good amount of tension, but they still are very bright and very present. There are 12 coated strings on my acoustic right now, and it sounds a little bit like this. Now, obviously the body and what kind of guitar is also going to contribute a lot to your sound, but the strings do contribute a lot, and they definitely contribute a lot to the playability. If you want strings that are a little bit easier to play, then you want to go down in the number, like, and basically you're lessening the tension on the strings. So 11s are going to be a little bit easier to play than 12s. 10s are going to be a little bit easier to play than 11s, and so much and so forth. But on acoustics, generally, I like to buy a set of 12s. If you're really wanting that punch in an acoustic guitar, you could buy some 13s. They're going to be harder to play, much harder to bend, but they're going to give you a little bit more dynamics, more of a punch to your tone. All right, now let's look at electrics. Okay, so in the world of electric guitar strings, there's obviously a lot more variables with electric guitar strings. You'll see a lot more variables with different metal alloys. I love, for acoustics, I love buying phosphor bronze strings, for instance. Electrics, you'll find a lot of like nickel metal alloys. That's why a lot of electric strings are going to look silver and a lot of acoustic strings are going to look bronze. Now, I always get asked the question, can you use acoustic strings on an electric and vice versa? Well, the answer is yes. Technically, you can. Technically, you can do whatever you want with your guitar, but it's all going to contribute to the sound, you know? There's something about phosphor bronze on an acoustic is going to give that like extra punch and bite and just meld itself really well to the tone of an acoustic guitar. The wonderful thing about like metal alloys like nickel is they're easier to play. They let you get more out of your electric guitar, and because your pickups have magnets under them, you just pick up so much sensibility and all of that little finger noise that I find nickel alloys and electric guitar strings match more of that electric sensitivity. So yes, you can use acoustic strings on an electric technically, but they're sold separately for a reason. You know, there are metal alloys that work better on an acoustic and metals that work better on an electric. And also you'll see the string gauges. Typically you're gonna want a lighter string gauge for an electric guitar than an acoustic. Reason being is you're probably playing a little bit more intricate things, you're bending more, you're gonna want a little bit more flexibility. So I usually play 10s on an electric. So I say usually because I do a little bit of everything. I have a guitar at home that has 11s on it because I like practicing with some strings that are a little bit heavier just to improve the strength of my fingers. When I'm playing live, I actually use 9.5s. If you really go looking, you can find some 9.5 strings just because when I'm playing live, I just want nothing sort of hindering me, and it really helps me, you know, catch some of those like really difficult bends. It gives me that extra little bit of flexibility, and I find if I practice with 11s and I play live with 9.5s, it really is a vast difference, so that when I'm playing live, I'm like, this is so easy. I feel like, you know, I've been lifting weights at home that when I'm out playing live, I can do anything. So it's also something that you don't need to marry yourself to one number. You can, if you have a few different guitars, you can put different sets of strings on them to marry to that gauge. But I will say that you will probably want to set up a guitar for a gauge of strings. So if this guitar has 10s on it, it's best to have it set up, you know, you can definitely set it up yourself. There are so many YouTube videos about that. Maybe we can talk about that next week. Or you can just bring it to your local guitar shop and get it set up just so that that intonation is set for this guitar for 10s. And then I have a guitar that has 11s on it, and 11s are set for that guitar. And this guitar is set for 9.5. It's a smart idea to make sure that that guitar is set up for that gauge of strings. Then you're just gonna make sure that your intonation, when it's all lined up, is perfectly in tune. And when you're changing the tensions a lot with strings, it can sometimes throw that stuff out of whack. The cool part about experimenting with gauges is you're definitely gonna hear a difference in playing. So I have a Strat with similar pickups with 10s, and I have a Strat, the same Strat, with 13s. And I very rarely put 13s on an electric, but for the purposes of Stevie, because he used to play with 13s, tuned down a half step though, so they did feel like 12s for the record. We're just gonna see how it sounds a little bit different. I will say that the higher the gauge, the more of an attack, the more drive, the more presence that you will get. So let's just play something here. This is with 10s, and this is what it sounds like. Okay, so that's with 10s. Now let's hear 13s. So do you hear the difference? The 13s have so much more of an attack. They almost have, they're a little bit brighter, but they definitely have a stronger attack than the 10s. They're also a lot harder to play. And so if I was playing any intricate things, I mean, that's actually some pretty good tone right there, but it's much harder to play, like if I were going to play that on this one. It doesn't have the same attack. The 13s just give it that extra little bit of oomph. to it. Well guys, that's sort of a deep dive on how to find the right strings for you. Basically, trial and error is going to be your best friend. Finding the strings that feel the best. I would say start lower first and then work your way up in gauges. But a good place to start is 12s for acoustics, 10s for electrics, and then go from there. I wish you all the best of luck. Be sure to follow and subscribe to Marty Music as well as my own channel. All the links are below. We'll see you guys next time.